Code Explain says hi. So for today we're going to make our user be able to select a project. So for example, when he's editing a to-do, he can go and select the project for the to-do. And also when he needs to add a new to-do, he can go and select a project. Remember, we selected the personal project. If I go now and for example and show the to-dos of my work project, and I go and add new to-do, now the work project is selected. So no need to go and select the project when you are showing a to-dos of one of the projects. So let's go and see the logic behind this. So for the user to be able to select a project here, we need to update our TodoForm component. So we've created some state for our input, for our day picker, and for our time picker. We also need to create some state for our project or for our to-do project. It's going to be called to-do project, and then set to-do project to change the project we select. So I need to add an on-click event to these projects here. So whenever I click on one of these, I want to go and call my function setToDoProject, and then I want my to-do project here to be the name of the project. So if I click on personal, then setToDoProject will set my to-do project here to personal, the project name. Now also when I click on one of these, I'm gonna go and add a class name called active to it. So for the class name of my project here, we have already set the class name to project. Now I need to add a ternary operator here to check if the project.name, this name here, is the same as the one I selected. So for example here, the name of the project is personal. If I click on this, also the to-do project will be equal to personal. So now this is going to be true. So if that's true, I'm going to add my active class name along with the project. And else, if it's false, I'm going to just set that to an empty string. Now in the case of my to-do project, so when I go and click on one of these projects here, select one of these projects and click on new to do and open my form here, I want the selected project here to be the same as the one selected here, or the active project here is going to be the same as the selected project. So if you remember in the last part, we have created a context and then we created a state for our selected project. To get the selected project using our context, we're going to use our useContext hook and then we pass in our to-do context. Now the selected project here will be the initialized value of my to-do project. Now let's go and see these changes in our code. So if you remember, our TodoForm component takes in some parameters, then we return some JSX. Inside a form, an HTML form, we have this text for our input and the header. We have this remind me and this icon. We have this pick date and then this pick time or time picker, and then we have these projects. This is where we show our projects, and then we have our buttons. Now the code we're going to update in our TodoForm is going to be this code here, the one that is responsible for rendering our projects. So here we have a dev, so every project is a dev. It has a class name project. So now we need to add the active class name if it's selected, and then we need to add an on-click event to select the project. So we need to add the class name, we've seen this, then an on-click event to set to do project to the project name I've clicked on. Now we also need to show this message when we have no projects, which means when our projects array is empty, or which means when our project.length is going to be equal to 0, we need to show this message. So I'm going to go and use a ternary operator. So I'm going to say if the project's.length is greater than 0, which means we have some projects inside our projects array, I'm going to show my project, render the project, else I'm going to show this message here. So now let's go and code this. So again, I need the files from the last part, the part 13. I'm gonna go and copy the link to that folder, then paste it in down-git and click on download. Once you download the files, you're gonna get inside that folder, run npm install, and then you're good to go. If you already have the files, go and open your text editors. We're gonna go into our components, then our TodoForm. So we need to receive in other props, to-do project and set to-do project. And now I'm gonna go down where I render my project. I'm gonna add an unclick event first. So when I click on this project, I need to set my to-do project to the project name. And here I need to add the class name active. So if it's the project, if it's the selected project for our to-do, I'm gonna add the active class name. So if to-do project is the project name, I'm gonna add the active class name, else I'm gonna add the nothing. So it's just an empty string. Now let's go to our add new to-do component. So we need to create our state. So we need to declare the state for our to-do project. And then I'm gonna pass that down to my to-do form. So let's go and pass those to my to-do form. So the to project is going to be to-do project, set to-do project is going to be set to-do project. We're not going to change the names. I'm going to copy this for later on. Now I'm going to go and refresh. So if I go and open my add new to-do, now you can see that I can select a project. But for my edit to-do, nothing is happening and I get an error there. So I need to go to my edit to-do component and create the state for my to-do project. And then I need to pass these two props as props to my to-do form. Now if I go there, you can see it's working. Now if I select work and go to my add new to-do, you can see that it's not selected. So because we need to go and get our selected project using the context hook. So we need to bring in the use context and then pass in the to-do context. We need to import that too from our folder called context. Now we need to pass in the selected project to my use state. If I do that, now if I go here and select personal, if I click on work and then go to my new to do, work is not selected. So now why it's not selected? Let's go and answer this question and then get back here. So to fix the issue, we need to talk about our use state hook. So we have our add new to do component. We get our selected project using context, then we created some state for our to do project. Now when the first render happens, when we load our app for the very first time, we set our selected project to today. So the default value of my selected project is going to be today. So on the very first render for our add new to do, the selected project is going to be today. Then we use state to declare a state or to create a state for our to do project. And then we initialize the value of my to do project with today. So now at the very first render, remember, just the very first render, my to do project here is going to be set to today. Now when I go and click on one of these projects, for example, if I click on work, then selected project is going to be changed. So we're going to go and render our add new to do for the second time. So if I click on work, now this will cause a re-render for my add new to do component. So you may think that when I click on work, my selected project is going to be changed. Then I'm going to pass my new project work or my new selected project work to use state and then change the value of my to do project. So that's not going to happen. Why? Because the useState hook here is not there to change the value of my to-do project. The useState here is just to declare a state variable. So useState hook is just to create a React state, not to change the value of your variables. So here, in a function, the variables disappear when the function exists, but state variables are preserved by React. So that's when we need state. So we need to preserve this variable here and its value. That's why we use useState, because if we just created the to-do project as a variable, when my add new to-do function exists, my variable is going to be disappearing. A recap. So useState is just to declare a state variable, just to create a React state, not to change my to-do project. So when my add new to-do re-renders, we run this line of code, we go and get the new value of my selected project, but here, as it's already declared, it's not gonna be declaring this the second time. It's already there. It's like we're gonna just like skip this line of code, so nothing is gonna happen. So we're not gonna create a state again. But our useState has returned a function for us, so we can change the value of our to-do project or our variable here. So the only way to change our to-do project is by using this function here returned by our useState hook. So in this case, we need to call the function setToDoProject and pass in our selected project. So now when I click on work, my selected project is going to be changed, and then I need to pass that to my setToDoProject to change the to-do project value to the selected project. So after a re-render, we need to call this function from here and then see what's going to happen. Let's go and try this. So let's go and open our text editor, go to our add new to do component. Then I'm going to call my function setToDoProject and set it to my selected project, the one I get using context. Now if I save, you can see that it says too many re-renders. So here React stop the re-renders because it's going to be an infinite loop. So now let's go back and see why we have too many re-renders. After we understand why, then we can come back and fix our issue. So that's happening because when we call my setToDoProject, we change our state to do project. And if you remember, whenever you change the state or whenever you change a state, this will cause your component to re-render. So when add new to do re-renders, we go and call my setToDoProject. That will cause this to re-render. Then we call this re-render. Then we call this re-render. So it's going to be an infinite loop. So React must stop that, and it's going to show you an error message. So now I will have the permission to call this line of code, this function here, a side effect. So when you have side effects in React, you need to use a hook called useEffect. So let's talk now about some examples that are side effects in React. So you need to use your useEffect hook when you have some side effects, like when you need to do some data fetching or some manually changing to your DOM, or setting up a subscription to some external source. So inside of your component, when you need to fetch some data from an API, you need to put that inside your hook useEffect. And also when you need to get element by ID of an element, so you need to change the DOM manually, you need to put that inside your useEffect. And also when you need to set up a subscription, you need to do that inside your useEffect hook. So let's talk about our useEffect hook. So the useEffect hook here is just a special function. So a hook is just a special function that will hook you into some React feature. So useEffect hook will take in as a parameter a function, and we call this function an effect. So now when you pass your effect to the useEffect hook, your function will be remembered, and after a render is complete, your function will be called. So your effect or your function will be remembered and called after a render is complete. So if you're using useEffect hook and then you pass in a function inside the component, that component after the render is complete, then useEffect will go and call your function that you passed to it. Now let's go and see some examples of useEffect hook. So we have some cases when we don't need a cleanup. If you don't understand what is a cleanup, you're going to understand that in a minute. Let's see an example here. So we have a component called example. We import in React, useStateHook, useEffectHook. So I'm going to go and create some state. I'm going to call my variable count. I'm going to go and set it to 0. And then here inside my return, I'm going to go and render a button that says click me. So whenever I click on this button here, I'm going to go and set count to count plus 1. So when I click on this button here, we're going to increment my count by 1. Now I also need to change the title of my document. So this is a side effect, which means I'm going to go and use my effect hook. So I'm going to call my useEffect special function, and then I'm going to pass in a function. So this is my effect. So useEffect takes in a function as a parameter. And then I'm going to go and say document.title, and I'm going to set it to count. Now what's going to happen when this renders for the first time? My function example will be called. We're going to declare some state for our count. We're going to render the button, and then after the render finishes, my useEffect will call this function here, and then it's going to go and set the document title to count, which is set to 0. Now if I go and click on this button here, that will set count to count plus 1, which means increment this by 1. So when our state changes, remember this will cause a re-render. So this will be incremented by 1, so count now is equal to 1. This will re-render. After the render finishes, my useEffect will call this function again. So now document.title is going to be set to 1. So this doesn't need a cleanup at all. Now let's go and see an example when we need a cleanup to understand this. Now let's say, for example, we need to setting up a subscription. So that's a side effect, which means I'm going to go and bring in my useEffect hook. So I'm going to call my useEffect special function or hook from here, from inside my component example, and then I'm going to go and set up my subscription. So now when my component's render finishes, useEffect will call this function, and this will set up our subscription. In this case, if we don't unsubscribe, we're going to create a memory leak. So to avoid that, we need to do a cleanup. To do a cleanup, we're going to wrap this inside a function and then use our return. So to clean up, our useEffect hook needs to return a function. So now let's go and implement this in our code. So let's go to our text editor. Now I need to go and bring in my useEffect hook into my add new to do component. This takes in a function, my effect, and then I'm gonna just call my setToDo project. Now if I go and refresh, click on add new to do, if I click on one of the projects, you can see that we can't select it. If I click on one of the projects, you can see that it's selected, just like we wanted. But when I try to change that project to click on the other projects, it's not gonna get selected. So let's go and talk about this issue again and then come back here. So what's happening? So when I click on personal, for example, my selected project is going to be changed. This will cause a re-render. When this re-render finishes, my useEffect will go and call my function here. Then setToDo project, it's going to be set to the selected project, which is personal. Now, because this state has changed, this will cause a re-render. Now, selected project is going to be personal. To-do project is going to be personal. After the render finishes, my useEffect will go back and call this again. set to-do project to selected project, which is personal. Now the to-do project was personal. Now it's going to be changed to personal, which means the state didn't change, which means this will not cause a re-render. So now we're not getting anymore those too many re-renders or the infinite loop. That's good. But now when you go, for example, and try to select other, it's not gonna work like we've seen. Why? Because now we go and change other using set to do project from our form, from our to-do form, if you remember. So we go and set to-do project to other. Now the to-do project has been changed, which means this will cause a re-render. Now I might add new to-do re-renders. Remember, the selected project is personal, but to-do project is now other because I clicked on other. Now after the render finishes, my useEffect will go and call to-do project, and it will set the to-do project to the selected project, which is still equal to personal. This means that when I click on other, I select actually other, but when the re-render finishes, my useEffect will set back that to personal. So I hope you get that. So now to fix this issue, what I need to do, I need to skip effects. What do I mean? I just need to skip doing this. I just don't want to do this anymore unless the selected project has changed. So what I want to do here is I'm gonna tell it, so please don't go and set my to-do project to selected project here. So if it's the same, if I clicked on personal and I didn't change it to work from here, please don't go and change it here. I'm responsible to change it here. So when I click on other, I want it to be other. Please don't keep changing it from other to the selected project. So let's go and see how to skip effects. So to skip effects means optimize performance. So you don't want to do some effects when you don't need them. So let's see an example of skipping effects. So we import React useEffect. You've seen this before. We have our count state, and then we use effect to change the title of our document. We render a button. On click, we just increment our count by 1. When this renders for the first time, we're going to render our button, and when that finishes, useEffect will call this line and then set the title to the count, which is going to be 0. Now let's say that we have another state for our input called text. Now if I go inside my input here and then type in something, what's going to happen here is this will go and change the text. So when text changes, the state changes, which means this will cause a re-render. When this re-renders, and after the re-render finishes, my useEffect will go and set again the document.title to count, even if it didn't change at all. So why do you need to do this stuff here? Because count didn't change, so there is no need to change our document title. So here we need to skip effects. We need to skip this. We don't want to do this unless the count has changed. So useEffect takes in a function and then a second parameter, which is an array. Now inside this array, you will need to put all the variables you want to skip effects based on. So if I put here count, now useEffect will call this function only if count changed. If you have, for example, another variable, you want our useEffect to call this function if that variable has changed, you need to put in a comma and then that variable. So now let's go and implement this in our code. So I'm gonna go and skip effects when my selected project didn't change. So I need to add in a second parameter for my useEffect hook. It's gonna be an array, and I'm gonna put in my selected project there. So now my useEffect here will run this code only if selected project has changed. Now let's go and see that if it works. If I go now and click on personal, I must found that the personal project selected by default, and that's good. Now if I try and click on work, you can click and select other project. So that's good. So this means that it's working now. So if I click on work, let's go, work is selected by default. If I click on other is selected by default. Okay, that's good. We have finished. We only need to add a message when our projects array is empty. So if I click on this and then click on here, we need to show a message here because we don't have any projects. So I'm gonna go to my TodoForm here, and I'm gonna go and copy this code here, and I'm gonna say projects dot length if it's greater than 0, I'm gonna go and render my projects. Else I'm gonna go and render a div that says please add a project before proceeding. Alright, so I'm gonna add a style to this, and then I'm gonna set the color to red. So I need to wrap this inside color braces because style is an object. So if I save, so if I go and refresh, add new to do, now you can see the message there. But if we have some projects there, add new to do, you can see the projects are there. So that's it for this part. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part. Take care.